People who've actually their step-sibling. How did it happen? And how was your relationship affected? My mom was dating this guy she met on Match.com around the time that I was 19 years old. His name was Stan, and his daughter was frigging hot. My mom and Stan had been dating for about 3 months before I met her. He lived about 2 hours away, so he usually came up on the weekends to visit. I actually met Stan Jr., his son, a few weeks prior. He and I hit it off instantly, so they thought, why not get the whole family together? So, the next weekend we went on a family trip to a casino where I met her and Stan's younger son. Upon entering the hotel room, she decided it was necessary to proclaim that she gets whatever bed I'm sleeping in. Her brother doesn't think this is weird at all, which should have been my first sign. We end up having a fun night, sleeping in the same bed with mild, innocent contact throughout the night. The next day, when they left and we went home, I was devastated. This is the first girl to show any kind of interest in me. I was obsessed. Over the next 8 months, Stan and my mom would continue to date. He would bring his kids to our house for the weekend, and we would all sleep in my room, her brother on the floor and her in bed with me. Often, nobody questioned this. We started messing around pretty regularly at this point, making out and hand stuff mostly. One night we were awake really late, watching music videos. Her brother was asleep on the floor, and it just happened. It was dope. I did my thing, and then instantly leaned over the bed to make sure Stan Jr. was still sleeping, only to see his traumatized eyes wide open staring at the TV. He looked sad, like he wanted to cry. I kept that part to myself and let the night ride itself out. Enter 2 weeks later when my mom tells me that Stan has proposed, and they are getting married. I wasn't upset or even cared much until my friends, who I had obviously bragged to, started making fun of me for banging my sister. This carried on for about 3 more weeks, until Stan Jr. told his dad what me and his sister had been up to. He broke up with my mom the next day and asked for the ring back. And that's how I lost my V-card. Story 2. My older brother had a relationship with our older stepsister when he was 19 to 20, and she was 30 to 32. My mom was livid about it, while her dad just pretended it wasn't happening. Our stepsister was kind of a sugar mama. She spoiled my brother with nice things, paid for trips, took him to parties, and did drugs with him. They were definitely sleeping together. My mom is convinced that she dated my brother purely out of spite, and honestly, that wouldn't shock me. That said, my mom wasn't exactly innocent either. To get back at her, stepdad, and his wife for letting the relationship happen, my mom ended up sleeping with her stepson. Don't worry, I'm definitely in therapy for all this. Story 3. My parents separated when I was very young, and I had been living with my father, who wasn't seeing anyone. My mom had remarried by the time I started high school, and where she lived was a really good school district, so my parents agreed that I would start living with her. My stepsister was 2 years younger than me, and we didn't really get along too great, so we mostly avoided each other. The first 2 years went by without any incident whatsoever. This was back in '96, and we only had one computer, which was in my room. As a boy, navigating the early internet, you can imagine what I was getting up to in my room with the computer. The thing was, since she just started high school, sometimes my stepsister needed to use the computer too. I didn't have a lock on my door and she would just barge in, sometimes catching me mid-spank. Of course, I would scramble to cover up and close the windows on the computer I had open, but you could totally tell what I was doing. Like I said, we didn't get along, so rather than any wild thing happening, she would yell at me, tell me I was gross, and even parade around the house telling my mom and stepdad what I was doing up there. They didn't care or say anything to me about it, but I was mortified, so I tried to be more discreet and only do that late at night. I thought I was getting away with my late-night spanking, but it turned out my stepsister knew how to check browser history, which back then didn't even occur to me. The same thing would happen after she'd used the computer. She'd run around calling me disgusting and telling everyone that my history was full of corn. It pissed me off and embarrassed me, but what could I do? One day, we were hanging out playing a game on the computer, which was pretty rare for us to do together. It was some game kinda like life, where each player gets a turn trying to get a better job and make more money and stuff. It was actually a pretty great night for us, because we were having fun playing this game and watching Jumanji on VHS, and actually getting along well. I left to go downstairs and get a snack, and when I came back up, she had pulled up the corn site I frequented. I don't remember the site, but it was just text links that took you to pictures, because that's all we had back then. I ran over and yelled at her and tried to close the window, but she just started laughing and told me she wanted to look at it. I was super embarrassed, but she wasn't really insulting me about it, just casually commenting on the pictures and saying the people in them were weird or whatever. Eventually, I relaxed, and we both just casually went through the pics commenting on dumb things like people's haircuts or whatever. It was totally turning me on, but absolutely nothing happened aside from looking, and we eventually just closed it. After that, I started thinking about her differently. Our relationship got better, and we would hang out a lot more watching movies in my room, playing games on the computer, and going through corn pictures laughing together for hours late at night just making fun of them, or saying if they were hot or gross. We started doing this more regularly, watching a movie in my room or playing on the computer, and it always led to looking at corn. At one point she noticed that I was casually doing solo, and she told me to put a blanket over myself if I was going to do that. Within a week we were both sitting next to each other looking at corn late into the night, and each doing solo under blankets. I don't remember how long it went on like that, or who first came up with the idea, but eventually we invented going hands-free. We'd make a bet that if the next picture had a girl who was a blonde, a guy with a tattoo, or something like that, then she would have to help me, or I'd help her. After that we stopped hiding under blankets, and would just do it right there. One night we stole some booze from our parents' liquor cabinet and watched Happy Gilmore in my room. Neither of us had ever really gotten drunk before, and we really overdid it. At some point during the movie, we started kissing each other, and then we tried to do it. Honestly, it's a bit of a blur, but I had no idea what I was doing and was too drunk to even focus. The next day we both pretended that we couldn't remember what happened because we drank too much. I was really freaked out about the whole thing, and we didn't hang out again for a while. Eventually, we started watching movies together again, and looking at corn together again too, doing it. We kept doing the same thing over and over. We'd pretend to get drunk, bang, and then say we remembered nothing. It wasn't long before all of the fake drinking stopped, and we just started doing it all the time. It was happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and our parents didn't know a thing. This went on for the rest of the time I was in high school, even when we each had been dating and banging other people. There was never anything romantic about it. We were just using each other to have fun. Eventually, I went away to college, and for the first year nothing happened, even when I came home. Then the next Christmas break, I came home, and one day, we were talking about how we used to do it all the time. We were both so hot that we ran up to her room and did again, and kept doing it that whole Christmas break. I tried to start things up one Christmas after college had ended for me, and she was back home. But she turned me down because she was in a serious relationship. Now we're both married, and she even has a kid. I think about those times now and then, but genuinely wouldn't dream of rekindling that sort of relationship with her. We've talked about it all because she was worried I might have feelings for her or something, but we both realized that it was never anything like that. We also agreed never to tell anyone about it. Story 4. When I was 19 or 20, I had a relationship with my older stepsister that lasted about a year. We're not blood related, but we do share 2 younger, biological half-siblings, so there's a unique dynamic there. Her dad and my mom dated for most of our childhood, so we grew up together, spending weekends as a blended family. For all intents and purposes, we considered each other siblings, along with her younger brother. That family unit split up when I was in my early teens, and I moved a couple of hours away with my mom. Fast forward 4 or 5 years. We hadn't seen or spoken to each other during that time until one day she randomly reconnected with my mom and came down for a visit. I'm not sure if it was nostalgia, the passage of time, or just seeing her in a new light, but when we reconnected, it felt completely different. She wasn't the awkward, dorky stepsister I remembered. She was this confident, attractive 20-year-old who, for reasons I couldn't fully grasp, seemed really into me. There was instant chemistry, and it quickly escalated. We started spending a lot of time together, which led to her staying over some nights, which eventually led to us sleeping together. After a few months of dating, we decided to move in together. We didn't hide our relationship from anyone, and while there was some mild awkwardness, most people didn't seem to care. Her brother, though, couldn't resist poking fun. One time during a family dinner, he put on the movie Say, It Isn't So, and kept making snarky comments like, "Isn't it so weird when siblings hook up? Hilarious, right?" Stuff like that, but it was more annoying than anything serious. About 10 months after moving in together, she broke things off. At the time, it hit me hard, but looking back, I can't blame her. I didn't take the relationship seriously or support her emotionally the way she needed. She wanted to go out, dance, meet people, and grow, while I just wanted to stay home, drink, and play video games. There was no compromise. I even suspected she might have been seeing someone else toward the end, but honestly, I didn't give her what she needed, and that's on me. I don't regret the relationship itself, but I deeply regret how I handled things after the breakup. We tried staying friends for about a year, but I was in a bad place, dealing with a lot of anger and personal issues, and I took it out on her in some awful ways. I was toxic and abusive, showing up drunk at her house in the middle of the night to pick fights, then calling her hours later to bail me out of jail after getting arrested for public intoxication. And she always showed up without hesitation. Looking back, I can't believe how much I took advantage of her kindness. She deserved so much better. Eventually, we stopped talking. I still remember our last conversation. It was from a payphone, because I was essentially homeless at the time. I asked if I could move back in with her, and for the first time, she said no. Good for her. The good news is that I'm in a much better place now, and from what I've heard through mutual connections, she's doing really well too. It's been about 14 years since we last spoke, but I genuinely wish her all the happiness in the world. Story 5. I had relations with my stepsister. She came to town to visit her dad, and the moment I went outside to help with her luggage, she gave me the unmistakable "I want you" eyes. Instantly, I knew I was in trouble. For a week and a half, I kept my distance, staying polite and careful. I'd been explicitly warned by my stepdad and her brothers to not even look in her direction, bring friends over, or do anything stupid. I had every intention of following their advice, but this was the first time anyone had ever wanted me that badly, and eventually I gave in. We secretly got together for the rest of the month she was in town. We were young, dumb, and fell in love, thinking we'd hidden it well. Spoiler alert, we didn't. When they found out after she left, I got my butt handed to me. For a few years, they wouldn't let her visit, but we kept in touch. After college, I moved to where she lived, and we've been together ever since, 11 years now. We have a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. Everyone's totally fine with it now, and we all joke about it constantly. Story 6. When I was in high school, my parents went on a cruise for their anniversary and left me at home. When they came back, they dropped a bombshell. They'd met another couple on the trip, fallen in love with each other's spouses, and decided to swap partners. Both couples got divorced, and my mom married the other husband while my dad married the other wife. That was shocking enough, but then I found out the new step-parents had a son, and we were all going to live together under one roof. I was not happy about it, and to make things worse, my new stepbrother was kind of a jerk. Then one morning, out of nowhere, I woke up to him kissing me. Cue a whirlwind of drama, on again, off again chaos, and one particularly stressful moment when we discovered that my mom and his dad had a one-night stand 16 years earlier. For a while we were terrified we might actually be blood relatives. Spoiler, we're not. Despite all the mess, we somehow made it work. We've been married for 20 years now. Story 7. I had relations with 2 of my stepsisters. My mom had been dating a guy for about 10 years. I had met one of his daughters when I was in high school years ago when we all went on a family vacation. Let's call her sister number 1. I had a feeling she liked me, playing footsie under table, etc., but nothing came of it, and I never saw her again until I was in college. One night, I found myself stuck in a part of town after the trains had stopped running, with no way to get home. Then I remembered my mom's boyfriend lived nearby, so I decided to head to his place. When I got there, only his daughter was home. We were both about 21 at the time, and she let me in. We started hanging out, drinking, and just talking. One thing led to another, and well, we did it. At some point, her dad came home, but he didn't say a word. He just went straight to bed. The second story is about her sister. Let's call her sister number 2. She and I went to the same college. She was a year ahead of me and was supposed to be my mentor, but I ended up getting to know all her dorm friends instead. I guess I had a bit of charm as the cute little brother. Despite that, sister number 2 was always more of a big sis figure to me. Fast forward 2 years, and we're at a house party at sister number 1's apartment. After a long night of drinking, things wind down and everyone leaves. Sister number 1 goes to her room with her boyfriend, leaving just me and sister number 2 alone in the living room, talking. Drunk me started asking about her old college friends, and somehow the conversation turned sexual. We ended up kissing and made our way to a spare bedroom. Then we banged. No one ever found out about it. We hooked up a few more times after that, but it stayed our little secret. My relationship with them is great. My mom and their dad got married not too long after. I hang out with them and treat them like my sisters. The only awkward moment was at a family cookout when I got drunk and sat in front of them both and said, "You know I did both of you, right?" Yes. I think I may have had a drinking problem. Story 8. My father passed away when I was 19. I won't get into details why, but my mom and dad were happily married. My mom moved on relatively fast, which kind of messed me up a little bit. I was super confused as to how. Anyway, my mom, let's call her Laura, met a guy named, let's say, Joe. Joe was cool, nice, and very respective. He had a daughter, whose name was Lexi. Lexi was 19 as well at the time, and we got really close because her mother had passed away due to similar circumstances. We got very close, and I eventually developed a crush on her. I didn't think too much of it because it wasn't technically my stepsister. One night we got pretty drunk in my room, and we kissed. It was a long night after that. The next morning, she came and had the talk with me, and it was super uncomfortable to say the least. It turns out she had similar feelings, and that same day we hooked up. I was her first and she was mine, and it felt amazing, physically and mentally. I felt like I loved this girl, and I did. We secretly dated for about a year until our parents announced they were getting married. This left us with another weird conversation. Should we stay together? Should we come out and say that we've been dating? All of the questions. We loved each other after all. We decided to just leave it to the future us. Well, when that time came, we tried to keep going. Even if we told them we had been dating, it still would have been weird. A few months into their marriage, we broke it off. We were very sad and felt like we couldn't tell anyone. We couldn't. And we had to deal with it on our own. It was sad, and to this day, 2 years later, there's still some awkward tension between us. I moved out and so did she. We only ever speak during family gatherings and on Facebook. Story 9. After my dad's messy divorce, he started dating again, but was pretty secretive about it for a while. Eventually, he decided to introduce me to his new girlfriend's family. We all went to a relative's country house for a big gathering, complete with plenty of wine and lively conversation. As the night wore on, it ended up just me and the girlfriend's daughter hanging out. We'd hit it off during the evening, and by this point, we were both a bit drunk. When I decided to call it a night, I kissed her goodnight, which quickly escalated into more. We ended up sleeping together and kept it going for a few months. I'm not sure my dad ever caught on to why I was suddenly so eager to visit his girlfriend's place, but anytime the invitation came, I was there in a heartbeat. Fast forward 6 or 7 years, and my dad married his girlfriend. I stood as a groomsman at their wedding. Now, during games of Never Have I Ever, I like to drop the line, I have never banged my sister, just to watch people's reactions. No regrets. We were young at the time and had fun, and these days we're actually good friends. Story 10. When I was in high school, my dad remarried. I was living with him at the time, and my new stepmom had a daughter, Mary, who was a year older than me. She went to a different school in the same district. My dad had been divorced for a couple of years before he got remarried, but Mary's mom had only been widowed for about 6 months. Mary wasn't happy about her mom moving on so quickly and made her feelings very clear to both her mom and my dad. Honestly, I thought it was a little soon too, but my dad seemed happy, so I just went with it. When Mary transferred to my school, we started hanging out a lot. We went everywhere together, partly because I had a car and partly because we shared a lot of interests. We'd watch movies, go for drives, and occasionally experiment with things like drinking and smoking. Our parents thought it was great that we got along so well, even though neither of us was particularly invested in their relationship. During the summer, we spent even more time together. It wasn't unusual for us to crash in each other's rooms after staying up late watching movies. Things shifted during a trip to my dad's cabin, which we told our parents was a chance to hang out in nature. What we didn't mention was that we'd planned to try mushrooms and have a psychedelic experience. That first night, while we were tripping, even casual touches felt intense and electric. One thing led to another, and we ended up getting very close. The rest of the weekend followed the same pattern, exploring nature, talking, and deepening that connection. After the trip, our dynamic completely changed. We were sneaking around, spending as much time together as possible, and growing closer in ways that were, in hindsight, really complicated. Things came to a head just after Thanksgiving, when Mary's mom walked in on us. That moment was catastrophic for everyone. Mary and her mom moved out almost immediately. Our parents tried family therapy, couples counseling, and even individual sessions for both of us. But the damage was done. Their marriage fell apart, and they divorced within a year. Mary and her mom moved across the country, and while we still saw each other at school for a while, it was never the same. Not long after graduation, I moved out too. Looking back, it was a mess of emotions, mistakes, and consequences that none of us were fully prepared for. Story 11. My parents are actually step-siblings. They started dating as teenagers, and when their parents met, they fell in love and got married, which made my mom and dad step-siblings. Since my parents were still living at home, they ended up moving in together, and my grandparents just let them share a room. It's always been a running joke in our family that my mom is technically my aunt, my dad is my uncle, and my brothers are my cousins. Edit 1. To clarify, my grandparents didn't get together until after my parents had started dating. When my parents became step-siblings, they broke up, but not before my mom got pregnant with me. Both of my brothers are actually my half-brothers, so I'm the only one directly tied to this situation. My parents haven't been together in 23 years, but they're still step-siblings to this day. Edit 2. A fun little story. My parents had already broken up when they found out my mom was pregnant with me. Meanwhile, my dad's other girlfriend, my brother's mom, got pregnant at nearly the same time. In fact, one of my half-brothers is only 2 months younger than I am. When she got pregnant, she moved into my dad's room. So my dad ended up living with 2 pregnant women at the same time. The whole situation was a chaotic mess, to say the least. Story 12. My parents were foster parents, and my mom had 3 kids from previous marriages, and my dad had 1 daughter from his previous marriage. Then they adopted 3 kids, my brother, me, and 1 other girl. Well, one of my mom's sons was a real jerk who screwed everything. He literally had 3 to 5 different girls coming home every week with him. Then, one day, the other foster girl that was adopted went to my mom and confessed she had been sleeping with her son and was pregnant. Now, my parents weren't very good parents at all, and my mom verbally abused her and smacked her to convince her to have an abortion, and she did. I felt really awful about it and got upset that she did it, and I remember my mom sitting me down and saying that she couldn't have little bastards running around looking like her son. Then 1 year later, my dad's daughter, with whom I was very close to, got really drunk, and she confessed she had lost her V-card to the same brother and had been sleeping with him since she long ago. She said she loved him, but he was literally dating 2 other girls at this time. I felt really bad for both of them. He was a predator, even though there was only a 3-year age gap between them. He even tried to seduce me at one point of living in that house. I told him to F off. I eventually ran away from that house. It was crazy bad. Story 13. Growing up, I knew 2 sisters who would fool around at parties. One was a little older than the other, so I always assumed the younger one did it to be included, and the older one did it for attention. I knew their oldest sister pretty well, and she always shrugged it off because they never went further than making out and light touching. She was way more reserved than the other 2, but all the girls dealt with some level of abnormal energy. It's just that for her it was more of a shy curiosity. I knew the younger sisters well enough to end up being the one they'd call to pick them up from parties gone bad, because they knew I always looked out for their older sister in school, and I wouldn't tell their parents the trouble they got into, which eventually meant they confided in me about some things here and there, mainly with their struggle to understand guys their age and navigate the hormonal fools. Hence why I sometimes had to pick them up from parties gone bad, meaning sausage fests, where they felt uncomfortable. By the time the older of the 2 was graduating, I learned they actually did a whole lot more behind closed doors than just making out and light touching. They were close enough in age to have shared a bedroom and been best friends most of their childhood, and they were a lot alike, so they were inseparable. 2 extremely curious girls with little understanding of intimacy norms, staying together, and being as close as conjoined twins is a weird cocktail of hormones and naivety. So, things happened over the years until it became commonplace for them and kept happening till their late teens. Honestly, to this day they both are easily categorized as 2 of the most drop-dead gorgeous women I've ever personally known in my entire life. So it's almost like some strange, taboo corn fantasy, except that they're not exactly cliché corn slut types. It's this weird concoction of curious sexuality and vanilla reserved attitudes, all in one for both of them. And it would totally seem like a contradiction until you met them. It's hard to explain. One is married with 2 kids and works as a makeup artist for television and movies now. And the other is a structural engineer who ended up becoming a high school math teacher because that was the kind of job she always wanted. Unfortunately, the oldest sister, who was far more reserved overall, ended up going through a lot and having what I call a mental breakdown. And she has a shaky relationship with the rest of the family now. Story 14. My uncle married his stepsister when they were teenagers. They had 4 kids together, but eventually divorced. Years later, my dad married her, his own stepsister, and his younger brother's ex-wife. This made my cousins my step-siblings. To make things even more complicated, my uncle lived just around the corner. Naturally, the situation was tense. Her kids didn't like taking orders from their uncle, and my dad always felt she treated my sister and me unfairly. My grandma was furious about the marriage and even threatened to disown my dad multiple times. The relationship didn't last long. After about a year, my stepmom couldn't handle my dad's drinking, and he was fed up with her kids' disrespect and how she treated my sister and me. We moved out, though they remained married for over 10 years. During that time, the dynamic with my cousin/step-siblings changed. They became more distant, and my sister and I were sort of labeled as the black sheep of the family. It was a shame because I really enjoyed being around my cousins, and I thought my aunt/stepmom was pretty cool at the time. Of course, I was only 10 or 11, so I didn't fully understand the situation. Looking back, I can't imagine what my dad and stepmom were thinking when they got together. The whole thing was confusing, to say the least. Story 15. I had a complicated and ultimately messy relationship with my stepsister. About 10 years after our parents divorced, we randomly ran into each other at a local bar. We caught up, reminisced about the good and bad times, and decided to plan a night out. We'd go see a live band at a bar in a larger town about 45 minutes away, along with one of our other sisters and a few friends. The plan was to book a hotel next to the bar, so no one had to drink and drive. The night started off great, good music, good vibes, and more catching up. But the others called it an early night, so she and I took an extra room key and promised we'd be quiet coming back later. We stayed at the bar a little longer, had a couple of dances, and kept talking. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes I'm oblivious when it comes to women. Then she kissed me. That's when I hesitated and asked, "Don't you have a boyfriend?" She replied, "Yeah, but he's not here. And no one we know is either." At that moment, I ignored my better judgment and went along with it. Back then, I wasn't exactly a saint. Things escalated quickly, and instead of heading back to our friend's room, we got our own. The night was wild, animalistic even, and it didn't stop there. This continued for months. As we spent more time together, her kids started seeing me as a father figure. Their dad had passed away a few years prior, and her boyfriend hadn't stepped up in that role. I grew to love her kids like they were my own, which only deepened our connection. She eventually left her boyfriend, and we moved in together. But the highs didn't last. We started arguing constantly, mostly about the same issues. She'd had a hysterectomy after complications from her last pregnancy and couldn't have more children. Even though I didn't want and still don't want kids of my own, she couldn't shake the guilt. We went in circles over it, and it wore us both down. After one too many fights, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I packed my things, left for an out-of-state trip to visit family, and completed my college internship. While I was gone, I gave her time to move out of my house. Story 16. I accidentally ended up dating my stepbrother. Here's how it happened. As an adult, I moved back to my hometown after spending 6 years away. I knew he had moved to town as well. We share a much younger sibling, 14 years younger than me and 17 years younger than him, but I had never met him or even seen a picture of him. At the time, I wasn't particularly close to my parents, and neither of us lived with them. About a month after I returned, I met a guy during a night out with friends. We hit it off and started dating. Things were going well, and after about 2 months, the relationship was getting serious. One day, we were together, and I needed to swing by my parents' house to pick up some game tickets. As we were driving into the subdivision, he casually mentioned that his dad and stepmom lived in the neighborhood. I thought, oh, cool, small world. Then we pulled into my parents' driveway. That's when he put his face in his hands and said, Oh crap. It turned out we were step-siblings. We talked to our parents about the situation. His dad didn't think it was a big deal, considering we met as adults and didn't grow up together, but my mom wasn't happy about it. Despite the awkwardness, we kept dating for another month. However, the pressure from my mom eventually became too much, and I ended things. The holidays were a little tense after that, but things settled down after my dad passed away. Story 17. She wasn't technically my stepsister since our parents were just dating, but we spent a lot of time together. Over a few months, we grew close and eventually fell for each other. I told her how I felt, and to my surprise, she felt the same. We talked about our feelings, and a few days later, she asked me out. When no one was around, we'd hold hands, hug, kiss, and cuddle. I loved her. It felt a little weird because of the situation, but we genuinely cared for each other. You might notice I'm using the past tense here, because that was nearly 2 months ago. Around 2 months into our relationship, she broke up with me. She said it wasn't working for her. When I tried to talk to her about it a few weeks later, she didn't really give me an explanation, so I can only assume she changed her mind about us. I was just temporary to her. My guess is she wanted to end things before school started again, so she wouldn't feel tied down and could date someone else. It hurt a lot. Even though she was essentially my stepsister, that didn't make it any less painful. I loved her. The worst part is that since our parents are still dating, I have to see her regularly. It's tough to move on when she's always there. Story 18. The outcome was both shocking and deeply tragic. I once had a colleague who, after a few too many drinks, confessed to having an affair with her stepbrother. What started as a fling developed into a serious relationship. When their parents found out, they were furious and tried to end it, but she and her stepbrother continued dating in secret. The situation became an open secret at our office, made all the more awkward because her stepfather was a senior manager in the company. Eventually, the parents discovered the relationship again and made a second attempt to force them apart. This time, things turned messy and public, causing significant embarrassment for her mom and stepdad, who were prominent figures in the industry by then. At work, she shared that her mom had issued ultimatums, though she didn't specify what they were. Then, without much warning, she stopped showing up to work and resigned via email, claiming she was moving to the U.S. to escape the drama. She texted a few coworkers, saying she'd had enough and needed a fresh start. Weeks went by with no updates until her stepbrother started reaching out to her work friends. Though I wasn't contacted, some teammates were. He was frantic, claiming she had broken up with him over text, but he didn't believe she'd actually left for the U.S. without telling him. Most dismissed him as unable to accept the breakup, but he eventually went to the police and filed a missing persons report. To everyone's surprise, the police conducted an initial investigation. However, as is often the case in our developing country, they quickly lost interest, writing him off as a lovesick ex. Things quieted down again, though he persisted, now convinced something terrible had happened. He even claimed to have fallen out with his parents over his suspicions. Most of us at work kept our distance, not wanting to get involved in such a messy family drama. 2 years passed with no word from her. Then, out of nowhere, the police reopened the case. They had arrested her mother's chauffeur on unrelated charges, and during questioning, he confessed to murdering her. He even led them to her body. At first, the police assumed the chauffeur had been stalking her, but their investigation revealed something far more sinister. She had never left for the U.S. The emails and texts that announced her move, and even the breakup with her stepbrother, had all been sent after her death. The truth was chilling. Her mother had orchestrated the plan to end the relationship and had gone to great lengths to cover it up. The revelation was devastating. Her mother, desperate to protect the family's reputation and stop her daughter from marrying her stepbrother, had crossed an unimaginable line. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.